Hello folks, welcome once again to the Hour of the Time. I'm your host, William Cooper. Many of you have been calling wondering why so many reruns have been played over the last couple of weeks, and I think if your ears are good, you have already figured it out. I've been very ill. In fact, for several days I could not speak at all. I'm just beginning to recover my voice, and I'm not supposed to be talking, and if I talk for very long, I'm going to lose it again. So you're going to hear an interview tonight that you've never heard before. This was actually taped on September the 21st, 1992, in Phoenix, Arizona. The guest tonight is Jim Mosley, who has been involved in the research of the UFO phenomena for many, many years. So that's what you're going to be listening to. For those of you who have called worried about me and about my illness, I thank you. It makes me feel very, very good to know that so many of you are so concerned about my health. I also had on my message service, I left a message speaking just about in the same voice that you're hearing now, that I had been ill. And people would listen to this and at the end say, when are you going to have some new shows? How come we've got so many reruns? All I can say is that's the sheeple factor coming out in somebody. It just is beyond me how somebody could listen to that message and still ask a question like that. But anyway, on we go. I want you to stay tuned, folks, this Wednesday night for a very important show about the IRS. You see, we're the only show in the whole world, radio, television, or anywhere that's ever exposed the IRS and the Federal Reserve for what they really are. And now they're starting to practice damage control. And I want you to pay attention who is putting out the damage control. Remember that you weren't hearing anything on radio about the National Rifle Association until I came out and said, if you join the NRA, you've registered your guns. Now you're starting to hear big ads on certain talk shows about the NRA trying to work their damage control. And then on the Wednesday night, the same Wednesday night that we do our IRS show, a famous talk show personality had someone from the IRS whistleblowers practicing damage control. I got news for you folks. The IRS is in charge of the whistleblowers. And if you work for the IRS and you want to blow the whistle, if you go to them, I guarantee you'll be in jail tomorrow. Understand that. None of them quoted any points of law. They didn't quote any of the IRS rules or regulations. They didn't give you real answers. And I really like that one answer about, is the IRS really an agency of the federal government, or is it a private organization? He said, well, the IRS has always been autonomous. He didn't give a real answer. Folks, I'm going to try to get that guy on this show. I want him on this show. I'm going to interview him by phone if he's got the guts. And we're going to talk about points in law, specific points. And I'm going to bury that guy under his own bullshit. Because that's exactly what it is. Remember, they're starting to show their true colors. And the only place you're going to hear the real nitty-gritty is on this show and nowhere else. On the other shows, when people ask you about the Freemasons, they dance around and say, oh, it couldn't possibly be a conspiracy. Freemasons aren't involved. Someday I'm going to get an expert in Freemasonry on this show, and we're going to cover it, but they never do. And when they do, the person that's the expert will be a Freemason. Mark my word, folks. Now, I'd like to talk some more. I got a lot to talk about, my trip to England, everything, but I can't. I just can't. I hope you'll understand. The doctor has given me orders to shut my mouth, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So listen to this interview. It's a good interview. I think you'll like it. And if you're interested in the UFO phenomenon at all, you're really going to like it. If you're not, I think you better listen to it, and you better get interested in the UFO phenomenon because it's got something to do with all of our futures. So without further ado, folks, here's the interview I did in September the 21st, 1992 in Phoenix, Arizona at, I forget what hotel, I think it was the Holiday Inn Hotel, with James Mosley, the publisher of a very sarcastic and satirical newsletter called Saucer Smear.
Hello, folks, and once again, welcome to the Hour of the Time. We have a guest this evening who has been involved for many years in what some call the UFO community or the UFO research community. He has a publication called Saucer Smear that is disseminated to a few select individuals. How he chooses these individuals, I do not know, but one arrives in my mailbox religiously. And I think Jim has some insights into the UFO phenomenon that may not have occurred to you, our listener. And I think that I value his opinion. We have met at many of the conferences around the country, which I go to, and sometimes as a featured speaker, sometimes just as a passionately interested observer. But Jim, welcome to the Hour of the Time.
Well, thank you for having me, Bill. I'm glad to be here.
What got you started in your interest in UFOs?
Well, way back in 1953, when I was a young, innocent person, or relatively so, I met a professional writer, and I was just trying to sort of break into writing, and he knew that I had an interest in UFOs, a vague interest, and we got talking about it, and he said that if I went around the country and did the legwork, so to speak, and interviewed all these people that had been in those early UFO books and tried to get to the bottom of the UFO subject, then he would co-author a book with me, a real professional book. And that sounded real good to me, and I wanted an excuse to go do this anyway. So I took my car, and I had some time and money. I went for about 3.5, 4 months in the latter part of 53 into early 54, and I interviewed 200 or 300 people who had been written up as contactees or as ordinary people who had made sightings, or as scientists who had commented on the subject of life on other planets, or anybody like that. And then I got all this data together, and then we never did do the book, is the punchline there. But that led to my original publication called Saucer News, which I began in 1954, and continued for quite a number of years, and then finally dropped in the 70s, early 70s, and then, make a long story short, I came back into it again in a way that more suits my own personality, which is I'm not really interested in sightings anymore, especially after all these years. I'm interested in the personalities and the new aspects of the subject that come along, such as abductions or MJ-12 or Area 51, which is your specialty. All these things excite and interest me, but I mean, a lot of it bores the hell out of me too. So I do it my way in my magazine and let the other people take care of the sightings and what I call the mundane stuff.
When you first were introduced to people who said that they had talked to someone from another planet or that they had experienced a UFO sighting, I know that was many years ago, and your ideas and your attitude has certainly changed. I know that too. But what was your first response to these people? I mean, could you sit there and really look them in the eye and keep a straight face and believe what they said, or were you the reluctant skeptic, or how would you explain your reaction to what you were hearing?
Well, I'll tell you, that's a good question. I remember the George Adamski case, which was the biggest one of the early 50s. I first read about that. Somebody sent me a newspaper clipping from Boston. I don't know why it was from there. Talked about this professor from Mount Palomar and a doctor who I assumed to be an MD, and I think 5 other people who accompanied him on this desert contact, which was the first incident that George Adamski had. And I thought, oh my God, if it's a professor from Mount Palomar, a medical doctor, and these other people, one was a radio specialist, and they all sounded very high class. And I thought, well, if they're saying that they met a spaceman on the desert, I should believe it, I suppose. But then I got more into it, and George Adamski lived near Mount Palomar. Professor was self-appointed, or at least appointed by his friends and fans. George Hunt Williamson had a self-appointed doctorate or something. He was very close to it. I know he never graduated from the University of Arizona, because I checked that out myself. He had no real degree. And the other people were just amateurs. One was a radio ham and this, that, and the other. So when I got that far with it, I was already getting suspicious. And then one of the people I interviewed on that trip I just mentioned was George Adamski and all but one of his witnesses. Then I started to talk to other background people that knew them and had something to add. And then I wrote an expose. So I went all the way from the first flush of believing it, and I did have the will to believe. I think we all have. Wouldn't it be wonderful, if it were true? Sure. But by the time I finished with George Adamski, I didn't believe a word of it, but I always did like him. And that's another thing that I think you understand. I kind of make 2 columns, and they have to overlap a little bit. But one is the guy's story. Do I take it seriously? Do I think it's true? Very often the answer is no. But on the other hand, the same guy, like you and I, for instance, we might just be friends without that. Because I go by what he's like and how he treats me and how he seems to treat other people. And if he's been to Venus on the side, well, I just try not to hold that against him, that's all. Like that fellow we were just sitting with down at the pool. Sure. He's been underground in Mars. Other than that, he seems fine. So I won't hold that against him.
I sort of divided the same way, only I have another column that's harmless or benevolent. If they're benevolent and they've been underground on Mars or they walked on the sun and talked to...
Walking on the sun is especially hard, you know that?
And they're still nice people and don't seem to be harming anybody, that's okay. If they seem to be malevolent or malicious in their intent, then it's pretty hard for me to be friends with those kinds of...
Well, I agree, sometimes it does. I mean, maybe we shouldn't just name a couple that I feel that their story isn't good and their personal conduct isn't good either, and so then I just don't like them. I mean,
sure.
Well, Bud Hopkins comes to mind. Not that you asked, but...
Well, Bud Hopkins is a favorite subject of mine. In fact, in my book, I documented where he was practicing, in fact, psychotherapy on these people who claim to have been abducted, holding actual group therapy sessions, and has no psychological degrees or training or expertise whatsoever, and a doctor who he had conned into getting in there to help him with this stuff, brought this to the attention of the state medical board in New York State. And what happened is they never did investigate Bud Hopkins. They took the medical license away from the doctor who made the complaint.
That sounds like part of the point. No, I had somebody I was talking to the other day, we were talking about Bud Hopkins, and I said, as an artist, which is what he's supposed to be, how can he be practicing psychiatry? And this guy came up with a line that I wish I'd come up with. He said, well, he must have heard that psychiatry is an art, and so it's just part of his artistic work.
Technically, he's absolutely right, because psychology is not a science.
You're right.
It is an art, and the art seems to change with the artist.
You got it.
There are so many theories about the practice of psychology that you could take your pick, and who knows what's what.
Well, I've known psychologists and psychiatrists professionally and socially, quite a lot of them. I've been on 5-hour radio shows with big psychiatrists in New York City, and my general conclusion is they're at least as crazy as we are. Most of them, at least.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one study, well, I thought this was the most interesting study of all the studies I've ever looked at in my life, showed that psychologists generally pick the field because they feel that there's something mentally wrong with them, and they hope to be able to treat themselves and thus keep it a secret from their family and their friends.
You're very close. I've heard that, and I think there's a lot of truth in it.
And at one point, they had the highest suicide rate of all the professions. Now, I don't think that's true anymore, but at one point, it certainly was true.